Well, I've finally got some good news. Zerohedge is officially back on Twitter. And I don't mean that they made a second account or something like that. The real @Zerohedge is been unsuspended by Twitter. Now, it feels like an eternity ago that Zerohedge was kicked off Twitter for supposedly doxing one of the scientists at the Wuhan Institute of Virology and talking about how, the what at the time was, I believe, still considered an epidemic by the WHO, isolated in China, may have originated not from some kind of wet market, where people were eating bats, and those barbaric Chinese people just have terrible eating habits, and that's why everybody got sick. No, Zerohedge said, well, perhaps it came from this level 4 biolab, which is just up the road from this wet market. A lab which in the past had been cited for its poor safety standards, and watchdogs had even from the U.S., said that there was a danger that some sort of virus could leak out of the facility. And in this article, Zerohedge listed the contact information of one of the scientists who was working on, some sort of, virus that seemed to be connected to this whole situation, and that was considered doxing, even though that was publicly available information. It was just their contact information from the Wuhan Institute of Virology's website. And it was very clear that at the time, the reason why Twitter banned them was not because they doxed someone, because of course they didn't. It was because they were, raising alarms over this whole virus thing. And at the time, again, this feels like an eternity ago, because now the left loves to talk about how concerned they are about the virus, or at least they were before all the riots started. But, for a time, being concerned about the virus was, a left-wing principle, because they're the ones who followed the science, TM. Well, before all that happened, the left was telling everyone who was concerned about the virus that you're an anti-Chinese racist, and that getting all up in arms about this or blaming the Chinese government is just pure xenophobia. And so, kind of funny considering all the riots going on now about racism, but back when Zerohedge was banned, it was very clear because, they were perceived to be racist, or at least that would have been the logic within the left-wing mind. Of course, it might have been because Twitter at the time was trying to be a little friendlier to the Chinese government. They were sort of playing both sides, whereas in the last couple months, at least from what I've seen, they've decidedly shifted in a pro-American direction. They're very much more in line with the U.S. deep state than the Chinese state. And so it's kind of funny that they're now saying, well, we made an error in banning you before. The error was that, they perceived Zerohedge as being anti-Chinese, and at the time, Twitter didn't want to play that role. Now, Twitter is more anti-Chinese themselves, and they say, well, Zerohedge, what they said is just fine. In fact, we agree with it probably. And actually, I would say that what Zerohedge was writing about at the time became conventional wisdom, within weeks of them getting banned, within only maybe a couple weeks. They weren't that far ahead of the curve. This whole situation moved very quickly. And I have to say, as a longtime consumer of their content, I mostly interacted with them through their Twitter page, so it became much more difficult for me because their website is such trash with all those ads and everything. To looking for articles and just browsing Zerohedge's homepage is just such a chore. I much preferred scrolling through their Twitter feed. And of course, they had lots of extra commentary, which were not full articles, like during Fed press conferences or, when there's down days in the market and things like that. I mean, hell, we missed the biggest plunge in the stock market in years, and the start of the next recession while Zerohedge was off Twitter. I mean, just imagine how fun it would have been reading what that account said, because, I mean, I don't know how many of you listening take much appreciation for the art of Twitter, but I have great admiration for people who are very good at writing good tweets. Additionally, Zerohedge is sort of like, I guess you could say, it's a medium for the dissident financial class. Folks who, are involved in finance or asset management or banking or any of these sorts of related fields or economics, who do not line up with the CNBC buy every dip consensus. there aren't very many places that will publish, things that make investors uncomfortable. That don't just sort of massage all their concerns and tell them you have nothing to worry about. Don't worry, never sell anything. And so even if I think that they might go overboard sometimes or publish some kooky stuff here and there, I think that Zerohedge is very important to balancing out the conversation. It's very important that more skeptical voices are heard, and that really, I think, was the biggest downside of losing their Twitter account originally, was that FinTwit became so much more long biased at that point. I think after that, the biggest, at least for people I was following, the biggest bear became Sven Henrik. And by biggest bear, I don't mean like the most bearish person. I just mean, the person who got the most interaction and had the most influence and was, making points against whatever the conventional wisdom was at the time. Because all of the the skeptical side of FinTwit was fractured. After Zerohedge was banned. Sure, you had all these different guys who used to be, by the way, published by Zerohedge with their own Twitter feeds still active on there. But without that central aggregate point, because Zerohedge was, compared to all these other guys, such a massive account, I really think that there wasn't a lot of room for their voices to be heard. And of course, they weren't amplified like they should have been, so it was much easier to sideline them individually. It was a divide and conquer sort of situation. And so for a long time I've been feeling, kind of down, just because, you get the feeling eventually that just really everyone is a Jim Cramer type of person, which isn't true. But who knows, maybe this is the perfect time for them to come back, because even though they missed the first big drop, the next drop may be even more substantial, which, if this is a real bear market, that's what you would expect. You wouldn't expect that during a depression, stocks would be back at all-time highs and sustain that, especially since the market again sold off on the Fed's press conference this week, which was, again, very, very dovish. They said that they're never raising rates again until like 2022 or something, but by then they can extend that. That's a nice way of saying rates are never going up. They're staying at zero forever, and the market sold off. And the reason for that is that news was already priced into the market. It's just like all the Fed rate cuts. Every dovish conference that the Fed holds is sold by the market, and that, to me, does not seem bullish. It seems like that this is still an incredibly weak market, which is being pumped up only by the Fed's raw liquidity. And so that means that at the current levels, this is not sustainable. We're going to see another drop, and then the Fed is going to have another push to try and bid the market back up. And they'll continue playing this game until eventually either it doesn't work anymore or the Fed has bought the entire market. And as it all unfolds, as slowly as it may feel, or as fast as it may feel, I will be very glad to have Zerohedge's Twitter account back to chronicle all of this nonsense. So with that said, if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day, and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.